Well, for me, it was from probably when I was born. I grew up, my parents played, they were semi-professional at that time, and so there was just jazz in the house all the time, all through my childhood, which was a great way of getting it in me, in my ear. So it's just always been in my life, for sure. Yeah.
I think my house was a classical house, so we grew up lots of classical music, playing classical music as well. Probably there were a couple of Louis Jordan albums laying around somewhere that we'd heard every once in a while. So it wasn't until I was much older, I was 18, 19, before I kind of really started listening to jazz.
I started getting piano lessons at the age of 3. My poor teacher. So I trained classically on piano until I was a teenager. I was quite a good classical pianist actually, but I stopped. Anyway, but no, I was very much, because I was the oldest child, I was very much the rebel. So I got into rock and you know, all that kind of stuff, and whereas my brothers were much more into jazz. So I taught myself guitar very young, from sort of about 4 or 5, and started writing songs actually when I was about then, at that age. But it was very much not jazz, and it was until I was 17 when I saw the light, when I stopped, my hormones finally allowed me to stop rebelling, and that's when I became a jazz singer at that point. Or I said to my father, I want to become a jazz singer. Yeah, so it was very sort of mainstream to modern jazz. They both played piano, and my father also was a very, very good vibraphone player actually. So that's what they played, and my brothers played saxophone and drums, and I sang. I played guitar, but not jazz stuff at that point. So we did have a family band. We were just like the Jazz Von Trapps for a while. But my first gigging experience was with the family band in a restaurant in the centre of Edinburgh called Clarinda's. And Tam White used to be on Friday night, and then us were on the Saturday night. And because we lived just next to the house, so it was good. There was a lot of arguing between the siblings.
I was a Suzuki kid, so they threw a violin in my hand when I was 3. And I've got a sister who's 5 years older than me, so I kind of was born into the sounds of violin being practiced. So I did that up until I was about 15 or something. I played for 13 years. 16 is when I sort of transitioned. But when I got to school, I started playing saxophone. I played saxophone for 6 years, and clarinet, and played around with piano and guitar. And joined a heavy metal band when I was about 17, 16. And started playing bass, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to do anything very serious. So when I finished high school, I went to music college, and I was still pretty much playing pop and rock at that point, but I had been introduced to the jazz stuff, and I sort of started reading a few charts, and as a bass player, it's like, you know, I was 17 and then the phone rang and somebody said, could you play bass tonight at the Cafe Bistro down Praha downtown? And it's like, okay, what do I got to do? You know, and that's how I got into jazz, is I sort of showed up at gigs with my bass and an amp and a real book, and I didn't know anything, and they just sort of sit in the corner by the drummer and start playing. So that was my introduction to it, and then as time went on, I got more and more serious about it. And then as I finished college, there was a guy named Tommy Banks, who's quite a famous Canadian piano player. He was my advisor at the college there. He said, you should get a double bass and go to McGill, because they've got a new jazz program there. And so I kind of went that direction. Yeah, I was 20 when I picked up the double bass for the first time, so quite late to the game, really. What's really intriguing about it, which actually leads me down a path that's maybe not always very jazz, but it's the improvisation, and it's the thinking about it, and it's the invention as much as anything. It's like jazz is kind of a deep, complicated subject to talk about, but for me, it's really about invention. It's about discovery. It's about textures, and it's about also your own personal study with the music and with your instrument.
I think for me it's the harmonic colours, they're so lush and beautiful, and I don't know, maybe because I heard them all the way through my life, they're very much linked to there's Ella arriving. Named after Ella Fitzgerald, by the way. The colours are very much linked to my emotions and my expression of emotions. So that's always been a great release for me just as a human being. And I don't find that so much in other genres of music. But for me, jazz just, it links in with my emotion and my release of emotion as a human being, and I don't find that expression so much in other genres of music. So I need that richness, I think, to be both creative, because I'm a songwriter, but also just to express myself and to be a communicator, which is my main drive as a musician. So jazz is, yeah, I mean, for all its difficulties that it can have with, you know, perceptions of it, that's for me been the greatest thing. Plus the improvisation. I mean, I'm very much an improvising singer as well, and I love that. I love the freedom that affords.
Okay, so you're at McGill, you're in Edinburgh. I think we need to get you together. How did talk us through that?
Well, we have to mention my brother Tom, otherwise he'll be very, very angry.
Well, no, because he'll mention it himself.
Well, he will, but
I met him at McGill. I finally got out of Edmonton, because I'm from Edmonton, and it was really difficult to get out of, because it's far away from anything. So I went to McGill in Montreal, and in my second year I met him. He showed up, he took a year off his studies to come and do composition. But while I was at McGill, I became friends with a saxophone player, and we played a lot, we hung out, and he said, "Come busking." I went, "Okay, what's busking?" sort of thing. And so we flew to Europe that first summer and spent 3 months running around Europe with a bunch of friends from all over, some Americans, some Swedish people, a couple of French guys. And it was there that sort of, as I got to Europe, I kind of went, oh, because North America is kind of one thing and Europe is very different. And I lost my heart to Europe that summer. So I went back, finished McGill, and as soon as I finished McGill, I worked for a couple of months to make a bit of money, and I moved to Europe, and I've been here since 1991. And in that time, Tom and I stayed in touch, wrote letters back and forth, and he went off and finished his medical degree. And then I lived in Paris for a while, and Switzerland, and settled in Amsterdam eventually. And I used to come over in the 90s to do tours. So I toured with Tom's Orange Year Ensemble and some of the European groups that we did. And we met at that point, and then we did a tour together because you had a band with Gina. And so it sort of organically grew up, but then I couldn't get to Britain because of my Canadian passport. And then I kind of burned out in Amsterdam, so I took a plane home and retired from music. And then not long after that, we sort of got together, and then I moved here. And
we got together on email. It's when email just started.
It was. Yeah.
But yeah, so Tom had to get a fiancé visa to come over. So it was like, right, we just need to do it.
Yes.
It was everything or nothing.
But it was good because we'd known each other for
we had known each other
5
for a long
years
time,
or so at that point, and there's sort of quite a strong bond there. But we hadn't gone that direction. But we did now. We done did it.
Okay, so I kind of followed the family medical route a little bit, but not really knowing why, and did a degree in psychology. But while I was doing that degree, I was gigging every night, because that was kind of at the heyday of Edinburgh, really, in my experience anyway. So I was literally gigging every night in Edinburgh, places like La Tache, and you know, it was just brilliant time. And Fiona Duncan very much took me under her wing because I was really the only young jazz singer at that point happening around the scene, and so she very much gave me her depths a lot of the time, which was brilliant, and she was just there, just giving me amazing gems of wisdom. So I gigged as a singer, working all jazz stuff for several years, graduated from psychology, and then moved into well, just being a musician, and I also set up a management agency because there was nothing around for jazz musicians at that point, and I ran a jazz club at the Merlin in Edinburgh, and just to highlight some of the young bands. So it was like the John Ray Collective, there was Brian Kellogg Trio, because there was nobody really doing that at that point, and I managed to get some funding from the MU and risked some of my money that I didn't have. But anyway, it was really good, and it was a good time then. And I also went and worked at the Glasgow Jazz Festival and programmed the Scottish section. They used to have a big Scottish section of the festival, which was great. So I did that for several years, and then I was kind of encouraged to apply for this Jazz Education Development Officer post down in England. It was the first post of its kind. I don't know if there's been any since, but anyway. And I got the job, bizarrely. So I went down and worked for Jazz South and South West Jazz, raising funding for jazz education and putting on workshops and stuff like that all across the south of England. So it was a huge remit. And whilst I was doing that, because I was kind of quite lonely because I didn't really know people, that's when I started writing songs and started performing. I met musicians down in England and started performing my own stuff down there, which was, had a lot of, very influenced by jazz, but also a bit by the folk that I'd kind of grown up around also, growing up in Edinburgh. And also doing the education work by organising workshops. I would go and learn just by watching the other tutors. So when I moved back to Scotland, I then embarked on being a teacher as well. So I did both private teaching and workshops, which I still do now. But that was very much the start of me as a singer-songwriter. And that was quite a difficult time actually when I came back to Edinburgh, because I think the scene was quite purist at that point, and they didn't embrace it. Didn't embrace me as a songwriter. There was a slight sense of, how dare you try and sing songs that are not jazz standards at that point. This is a long time ago, and because I'd been very much one of the darlings of the jazz scene prior to that, so I was kind of pushed out. But in a way, in hindsight, I'm glad, because it made me forge my own path, and I became the jazz singer in the folk festivals for quite a long time because of that. So that's kind of how I moved on to that. And then nowadays I blend working jazz with my original music, which is, sits both in the jazz camp and in the contemporary folk camp. I feel the scene's got smaller. It used to be this big family thing, the older musicians would really work and nurture the younger musicians, and the younger musicians would work and inspire the old musicians and be inspired by. But there was so many gigs. I mean, literally, if you lived in Edinburgh, you could work every night, and that's not happening. So the venues have gone down, and also there's a lot of students coming out, brilliant musicians coming out from all the music colleges now, which there didn't used to be. We all used to learn on the job back when I started out. So in a way, there was less of us, I think. So there's not many gigs for a lot of people across the generations and across the board of music. So it's hard, it's challenging, but there's quite a lot of us that are banging our heads and trying to work out how we can move from here. So that's encouraging. There's always hope.
When I first arrived in Edinburgh, I came over to work with Tom, and we met then. And sort of the day we met, lots of sparks went off, but I wound up sort of hanging with you for a few days because Tom was off writing the music for the tour. And we sort of sat down, we were playing guitars and just sort of talking about music, and we hit off on a lot of things very similar. The people I was working with in Europe were jazz musicians, but we also ran kind of a pop band, and we did covers. We wrote a lot of music, and I've never been a jazz purist in that sense, so I was always writing this, that, and the other thing, and Beatles and Steely Dan and Crowded House, all these sort of things played an influence. And you were writing songs and singing songs that had this beautiful jazz sensibility and nylon string guitar and beautiful voice, and so we started hanging out and playing at that level. And it kind of has grown out of that, and nearly 30 years later we're
Yeah, well, I had a band at that point with my sister-in-law Gina Ray. So Tom, which started off as a duo, and then we grew into a big band really. And Tom was a bass player in that for quite a long time. And then when we got married, so when Tom moved here properly, that's when the duo started. Yeah. And we released an album in the first year. We recorded it in our shed, didn't we, in the middle of Edinburgh, which was a really nice album. And we went on, and we've done loads of great stuff. You know, we were at the Rochester Jazz Festival in New York, which was lovely, went on the Made in UK showcase, and we've supported Bert Jansch, and we've done lots of different really interesting things over the years. Yeah. And then lockdown was brilliant for us because we were together, so we just started doing a weekly live stream, and that's been a really interesting point in our career as a duo, I think. And we managed to record an album after the first lockdown finished. But our fan base has really extended because of live streams, because of the international reach, which has been brilliant. Mm-hmm. And we got some great feedback for our new CD, because we were so rehearsed, because all we'd done for months was just sit in this room and play, you know, whereas not in normal life we wouldn't have had that opportunity. So it was the most ready we were, well, I've ever been to go into a studio. It was amazing. Sure. And that great joy of being out, because we live just in the next village, is one of the best studios in Scotland, and he was just opening up, so we were all so excited and delighted to be there. It turned out into quite a magical album. So yeah, we've had a really, and it's been lovely to share that together, you know, share that journey, you know, we've done a lot of travelling because of it, and been places, and also just the joy of doing gigs, which obviously has not been for the last while, although we've got one at the jazz bar coming up in a minute, which is great. But yeah, there's been lots of lovely stuff as a duo.
Yeah.
And how does that work, sort of being married and working together? I mean, is there tensions, or is it just, does it help? Does it bring you together?
I don't think there's not been actually that many tensions.
No, it's very much it's a mutual together kind of a thing.
Yeah.
You know, we both love doing it.
And we've been lucky because my mum has been brilliant, because we've got kids who are now grown up, but during the time when they weren't grown up, you know, she would let us go off at times to do our gigs. So that was very helpful. Yeah. No, they're both kids are very, very musical. Our granddaughter is very musical. Our son's at music college studying guitar and bass, and it's that they've been much more absorbed than I was, because we're professional musicians, I suppose. So they're trying to earn more money than their parents. So.
Yeah. They have real objectives.
Tell me why there's so many of you jazz musicians out in Pathhead.
Well, there's half of us are jazz musicians and half are folk musicians. But my brother Tom and his wife Gina, and Tom and I were the first people in the area to move in. And then I guess somehow we must have let people know that this was a good place, and then some of the folkies started moving in, and then there was this sort of momentum, and it's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. It's beautiful. There's 15 of us professional musicians that live here, and it's been quite magical. In 2013 we got the Creative Place Award from Creative Scotland, so we got a big chunk of money to do stuff in the village, which was great and completely nuts.
Yes, we put on a weekend festival once. And
15 musicians running that was crazy, but it was great. And actually, during lockdown, there's a sense of family with that's quite special, actually. And you know, we've all raised kids here, and we've all worked in each other's bands. There's been quite a lot of cross-fertilisation of music that wouldn't necessarily have happened. There's also an electronic music guy, and you know, so there's quite a melting pot within the Pathhead Music Collective that we call ourselves. So yeah, it's great. Yeah, big concerns. The scene needs to get bigger again, and I'm not quite sure how that happens, but you know, as I said earlier, there's definitely people putting energy into that, which is great.
I sort of have a feeling, and I may be completely wrong, but you know, over the years I've watched the scene get smaller and smaller, particularly in Edinburgh, and I just sort of partly concerned that the way that, for example, Edinburgh City Council has made it so easy for citizens to sort of shut down anything in the neighborhood that's causing disturbance. Means that all the clubs are closed and live music is closed and even the nightclubs are closing. And so that nightlife, that existence is not really there. And that's where the community grows. And for us to build up some sort of big family jazz community again, we need to have places where people can go and party and play music and have fun. Because that's really essential. And I don't know if that's going to happen.